Hello and welcome to this week's review of the latest episode of My Hero Academia entitled The Ones Within Us. Before we get into the review itself, I want to know what you thought about this week's episode. Leave a comment down below and you'll be read out in next week's show. And whilst you're there, be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell and do all the YouTube stuff that YouTube wants to do, because YouTube's in the crazy scary place of small content creators. Support your local small content creator today. It will do them a power of good. And a big thank you to everyone who's liked and subscribed from last week's video. It truly does me a power of good. Now, on to the review. Okay, so there's a lot to process with this week's episode, so forgive me if I've missed some element or another. I'm sure that I'll be able to discuss it a little bit more in the comment section as the comments start to come in. But with all that said, let us get into the positives, as there are a lot of positives to this week's episode. I have to say that I really did enjoy the first half of this week's episode. We had the Midoriya and this fight with the all-for-one Tomura combo thing. The continued creepy body horror that we start to see in these sequences is just... it's sublime, but at the same time really unsettling, especially when we get into the Vestige World thing, where we have the Tomura all-for-one combination thing looking like some out of Basket Case or Tales from the Crypt. This twisted fusion between the two of them, it's unnerving. It's not as unnerving as certain other things I've seen in other programs as of late, but still, for a program like this, it is... I don't want to keep using the word again, but still, it's really unnerving, and just to see that it is this creepy, fleshy mess. And of course, the fight, what little that we did see of it before then, was decent. I still think that the most of the emotional impact of that fight was still from Bakugo's sacrifice, which we see a second time this week, redone, so that everyone who got upset about it last week, well, you're getting a second helping of it, so well, at least you were a little bit more prepared for it this week. I do think, though, that the bit where Midoriya was getting mad, that was a great moment. Again, this is another one of those times where I kind of wish I was recording myself, because my reaction to that was just... it was this combination of it just going, ah, oh, 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 essentially. You know, a part of me was wondering just which was creepier. That weird, twisted, angry face that Midoriya was pulling during that fight, or Tomura's. Just seeing Midoriya, this otherwise mild-mannered and fairly decently emotionally calm person, just metamorphosizing and twisted into this berserk state was just... I don't even know the right words for it. It was like a flash into some kind of alternate universe where he did turn into the villain. Or this was the moment where things snapped for him and he really did turn into a bad guy. But hey, it was a good moment, and once again we tip our hats off to the animators of this series. It was really just a fantastic moment. And of course, within that whole sequence, I do appreciate the look on Tomura's face when he realises just how mad Midoriya is. Just that look in his eyes like, oh... shit, was I got a kick out of it. Like, I'm sure that Midoriya getting as mad as that wouldn't have been enough for him to win the fight. Maybe Tomura realises that, but he knows it's going to hurt like buggery when he starts getting the crap beaten out of him by Midoriya. You know, let's not get away from that fact. Whilst he can regenerate, it's still going to hurt like hell. And another thing that I did enjoy, and whilst I don't often talk about the voice acting for this program, mostly due to the fact that I watch the subtitled version, and I know that some of you are watching this after the fact with the dubbed version, so bear in mind this is a comment for the subtitled version. I found the voice acting for All for One to just be brilliant. There's no other words for it. It was a stellar, just pitch perfect performance. The tone and personality that he was able to convey in the sequences that we saw him in this week were truly fantastic. We had seen him having these long dialogue sequences before, but not to this extent. I feel that this is the longest period where we have heard All for One talking, and what we get from this performance is that just a better and clearer understanding of who his character really is. We see him as this powerful, sociopathic, twisted entity who is under no illusion that he's evil. He doesn't see himself as being the good guy in any equation. He's evil, and he knows it, and he loves it, and he's going to revel in every moment. Up until this moment, yes, we've had feelings of that before, but his personality and his demeanour was always a lot more calm, a lot more insidious. But now he's in just a full-on triumphant mode, and likely that is due to the fact that right now he feels that, yeah, I've got this, I've won. I've got Midoriya right where I want him, and I'm going to get one for all. He really isn't, but as far as he's aware, he's going to end up doing that. So that's probably why he is quite as bombastic right now as he is. He thinks he's going to win, but we'll soon see about that. The second half of the episode with the stuff with Toga was solid. I don't feel that it's as strong as the first half, but it was good within its own right. I did appreciate the moment that we see to her towards the start of that whole series of events where she's processing what it means to be a hero, at least in her mind, and the possible repercussions of that, of what that might end up leading to in relation to her and her two lovers. And I say lovers because we all know that love sure as hell ain't reciprocal. Just getting this understanding of her just thinking to herself, well, if killing villains is what heroes do to villains, then what is Midoriya and Uraraka gonna do to me? And now she wants to confront that fact in the most bloody and violent way possible, at least in her mind. And I did like, and whilst it is a minor moment with all that kind of stuff, is this hint as to what being a part of a group like this means for the villains. At least where possible. We do get a very clear understanding that for many of them this is just for shits and giggles and they're just doing this so that they can hurt and maim and murder as many people as possible. But, you know, you get a feeling for some of them that there's more to that. Even if there's a lot of front and BS from them right now, that they are kind of here because there's nowhere else for them to really go. And this is probably one of the few places where they can just be without worries to people reacting the way that they do towards them. Though, of course, I feel that that might be something that's elaborated upon and discussed in future episodes. And one final thing, and I know that this might not be for everyone's taste, but I just loved that moment when Uraraka stepped into that house and the soundtrack just dropped. And all we got was the ambient sound of the clock ticking. It was just such a brilliantly powerful moment, and this often goes back to the fact that I'm someone who is a big advocate for silence, particularly in pieces of media and within performance. I think the power of silence, even just with just ambient noises in the background, is oftentimes way more powerful than soundtrack on big bombastic sound effects. It conveys something that you just can't with pieces of music or with dialogue, and we get that within this episode with this particular moment. It just creates this scene of deathly carnage, and now Uraraka has to deal with it. It's creepy. I know that I say that word a lot now when I talk about My Hero Academia, but it creates a creepy and unsettling moment, which only adds to the tension, particularly bear in mind where that confrontation ends up going. And of course, we then end up pivoting to stuff which hopefully will build on Uraraka a lot more, because for what is essentially the love interest of our main character, she doesn't get a whole lot of screen time, but I'm sure that'll change going into next week's episode. With all that said and done, let us now get into the negatives, such as they are. And my main negative for this week's episode is the fact that this episode feels like 2 episodes smashed into one. This isn't the first time I've had this feeling, and likely it won't be the last, but half of this episode is stuff tailored around Midoriya, with the other half being the stuff with Toga and Uraraka. Whilst both of those halves are strong in their own right, I feel that the two of them being put together in like this, I can't help but that feel that it's taking oxygen away from one of the other. I was perfectly at peace with the idea of having an entire episode centered around Midoriya and the other previous quirk users of One for All. But we don't get that. We just end up pivoting about midway through the episode's runtime to the stuff with Toga and Uraraka, which, again, while strong, isn't as strong as the stuff we've just had, and the pacing of it seems a little bit out of place for me as well. It does a commendable job in shifting gear, as we see all the heroes trying to deal with the Gigantomachia guy, but there's still a part of me that feels that it could have been better handled, or better yet, these two aspects, these two, what I'm guessing is 2 different issues of the manga, could have been their own individual episodes. Of course, that does then lend us to the possibility of dragging this particular part of the storyline out even further, but sometimes I feel that's the sacrifice we need to make. The other issue that I had is that whilst I do feel that it's keeping within Toga's character to throw herself into a situation like this, just to throw herself into harm's way in the way that she does, there is a part of me that can't help but wonder if this was only happening because someone somewhere down the line said, we need another action sequence. I'm certain that that wasn't the case, but given everything else that's happening right now, all the different fights, all the different things that are currently up in the air at the moment, I don't think we needed something like this being thrown into the mix. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe it'll be worth it in the end, but right now it just feels like here's another action sequence on top of the other action sequence on top of the other action sequences going on. And I think that we're starting to reach critical mass here. We're starting to run the risk of it all just feeling like the conclusion to the Avengers movie where there's just dozens of things going on all at once, and it kind of starts to feel like a cluster fruitcake. Hopefully that isn't the case, but we shall soon see in the due course of time. With all that said, however, I do feel that overall this was a solid episode. It does at times feel like it's more connecting tissue to greater parts, but we'll just see as to how all of this develops going forward. Again, solid episode, and I feel that the elements within it are decent for what they are, even if I do feel that more time could have been spent in giving these elements their own episode or given themselves more time to breathe. Still, solid thumbs up from me. I think that it was great. With all that said and done, let's now get into Comment Corner! Our first comment comes from X1, or Ziggy, I suppose. We now have handles, so now I can read what people's username is properly, I think. But in any case, let's move on to their comment, and they said, I enjoyed this week's episode, which of course is referring to last week's episode. I don't think there was much else that Iizawa could have done to stop the effects of the bullet, though maybe chopping his leg off was good enough. Maybe he could have flicked it out of him. I don't know if that would... I don't know, I'm not a doctor. By the way, the audio sounds fine, which... you know, maybe is an option, him flicking the bullet out, but according to Scott TV Gamer, he doesn't feel so. The way that this bullet works is it injects the serum, made with Harry's blood, into his body, so cutting the bullet out itself shouldn't have been enough. Cutting his leg off as soon as possible is the only way to ensure it didn't spread out through the rest of his body, which I think is a fair assessment. I'll be honest, I don't fully understand how the bullet is supposed to work at the best of times, and there is a part of me that wonders if chopping his leg off at all really would have done anything, but I don't understand it. Like, it's like when we see in the zombie movies where someone chops their arm off to stop them turning into a zombie. I'm not sure that it really works like that, but let's just agree that it does work like that, because if nothing else, it just makes for such an awe-inspiring, just, holy hell, did he really do that moment, that I'm willing to put aside the possible... medical impossibilities of it all. But still, thank you both for your comments, they are greatly appreciated. And finally, last but not least, we come to Lillian Cuff, who says, I enjoyed this week's episode. The scene where Iizawa had his flashbacks of Eri was one of the cutest things in the show, and the scene where Iizawa cut his leg off was very intense in my opinion. And the Bakugo scene had me in tears. Also, the audio sounds fine. I am really happy that the audio quality right now doesn't sound terrible, and there is a part of me that does feel slightly guilty of the fact it sounds better than seemingly usual. Because I spent a lot of money on that old microphone, and now I'm using an even older microphone, and, well, it looks like it really didn't need to bother. But still, I do agree with you. I think that the flashbacks that we did with Iizawa were just brilliantly humanising of him. As I said with last week's episode, he feels like a character much like Bakugo, who is unfairly stereotyped. We just see him as being the cold, slightly unfeeling teacher, almost like this Snape-like entity, or at least I say Snape-like because I've never actually read or watched the Harry Potter movies. You know, this character who we're supposed to feel he's a little bit cold, but he has this warmer side to him, which I'm glad that we actually see a little bit more of as time has gone by, and we are getting a clearer understanding of his true emotional depths. And of course, this scene with Bakugo was just... it still is the emotional core of the action sequence itself. It was last week and it is this week, even though all we got for it was a flashback. It really just says for it just how effective that moment is. There is a part of me that worries that it has kind of been overshadowed because it feels like that should have been a bigger moment. Though to be fair, it wasn't overshadowed because that was one of the key elements that caused Midoriya to go nuts. So it did have an impact, though maybe it's how it was presented that doesn't quite land with me, but it still lands with me. You know what, I'm just going to start going to some kind of logical loop as it stands, so let's just move on and say thank you all for your comments. If you would like to leave a comment, you can do so by just going into the comment section. Leave a comment below and you will be read out in next week's show. Watch an episode, like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell and do all the YouTube stuff that YouTube wants you to do, because YouTube is increasing scary places for content creators. Thank you all for listening and see you next time. Goodbye! Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good.
episode. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!